your position a little bit?
Well, of course, we must remember that in that period of time and subsequent too, that my situation was somewhat different than those who participated in the strike, who were rank and file people who worked in the mill. And the reason it was different, of course, is because they lived 24 hours in the mill village or in the community in which they did, whereas I didn't. I could always come back to the safety of Atlanta, if you want to call it that. But this may have been part of the motivation of people who said then and said subsequent to then that they were not happy with what the union did, or the union didn't win, and that the union lost the strike, and a lot of the other things that were disparaging of the union. From my position, I could see it possibly more objectively, and that was what good did come out of it, and what changes it did make, and in the helping the people to solve their problems who were being blacklisted, how we moved them out of the environment that they were in, that they would have never gone anywhere, to a better environment, all of which had some effect on them. And of course, while you're talking about that too, one must remember that in the 30s and in the early 40s, if you represented unions and you were a lawyer, that you were not the most popular lawyer in the town by any means, and that a lot of lawyers looked at you with sort of what I call a cocked eye or askance, and wondered what the hell kind of a guy you were. Because remember, this was even before the CIO came into the picture. This was when the United Textile Workers was still the only organization within the picture. And it was a small union by comparison with other unions that were there. It was one of the few industrial unions. And when this tremendous revolt took place, they didn't begin to have the manpower. They didn't begin to have the ability to cope with it. I don't think anybody else could have coped with it, really, because there was no union that big in its own right that could have coped with it. And while it succeeded in making me even more convinced that that was the way that I wanted to practice law and to work with trade unions, when I look back at it now, I can remember so many times that when I would go into one of these towns and we would hold a meeting in which we would try to explain to the people what we were doing, and I was being trailed by the sheriff, or I was being trailed by one of his deputies, that I wasn't being trailed for security, but I was being trailed to keep an eye on me to see that I didn't do anything that they did not approve of. And of course, I could tell many stories of how some of our people were actually charged with things that nobody else would have been charged with if they had not been members of the union, and how difficult it was then to get them out of it. I can remember, for example, in one case that we had where they were trying to get a restraining order against us because of the fact that some of our people had decided that they were going to picket the plant because they had not been put back to work. And in that jurisdiction, which was in the state court at that time, I had to be introduced by the representative of the bar in that time, in that town, who had been designated by the bar to do it, and who turned out to be the one who represented the mill. So in 1 minute he's introducing me as a fellow member of the bar and qualified to represent these people who worked there, and then 5 minutes later he's there trying to get an injunction against us. And I think it's improved some since that time. There have been more of us who represent unions, although not that many in the South. But it means slowly even there that people's attitudes change. And I think that I could get an admission by lawyers who have always represented management against unions, that if it were not for unions, that a lot of the benefits that we take for granted in our society were developed because of us having trade unions. They either became legislation or else it became custom. I can remember one of the first agreements we tried to get in the textile industry, we tried to get vacation pay. And I can remember the lawyer for the company saying, anytime they want a vacation, all they got to do is get their clothes together and they can have a vacation, which meant that they would be leaving their jobs. Now, when you talk about vacation in anything, industry, in the office, anywhere else, we're not talking about an unpaid vacation. We're talking about a paid vacation. Nobody thinks that unions did that, but they did. That's part of what they did. And it's not a law. Because, you know, a lot of them say, oh, we don't need a union. There's a law that'll take care of us. There's no law that says that. Severance pay. There's no law that says you can get severance pay except in a union contract. And now a lot of the employing companies, if there's severance pay, they'll give you that. Paid vacations, paid holidays, other things.
So for you, you were saying before that you were a little bit objective. You saw the people who ran with it, and you saw the people who got really crushed.
Right.
And if you could just say it in that compact way. And so I decided, you know, it's like because I was somewhat removed, I could be of service or something.
I got you. And on reflection of what the strike did, as far as I'm concerned, to me, because of the fact that I could see not only the many good things that came out of it, but also the injustices that were perpetuated by it because we did not have either good unions to fight and big enough to fight, or laws to do it. If anything that I needed to increase my resolve to continue to work with trade unions to help them, that did it. And I've never regretted it. And as a result of it, why, I think I've been able to look at it from partly as an outsider, partly as an insider, but to also see the many things that happened and why it is that young people coming into industry these days ought to take a good look as to how the union can help them, not only in the textile industry, but in other industries too. And I have no regrets whatsoever about having continued to do it. I might not have made as little money as I've made with it. I might have become a millionaire, but I don't think I'd have been happy with it. I think I'm much happier this way.
Well, we've all benefited. And out of your sacrifice, a lot of people have benefited tremendously.
Oh, I don't know that you'd call it a sacrifice, honey. Out of my work, let's put it that way.
All right. Well, I think, now, one other thing.
Are we going to cut?
No, it's okay.
Still right.
Will you always remember this revolution of hope? Could you, I mean, you've said that before. You said it was a revolution of citizenship. Will you always, could you call it that and tell me why you'll always remember it, or why you want people to remember it?
Well, you know, we keep looking back at things that we call turning points. In my view, one of the turning points in the history of this country was what I call the strike or the uprising of 1934. And the reason that I do is because that was the first time that any industry that was as widely separated and as completely dominated by those that I call the feudal barons, the owners, who, when they talked about the workers, it was my people, as though they owned them. It was not that they owned them as slaves, but they owned them really body and soul, and controlled their lives from the time they were born till the time they died. And here suddenly, and out of what they thought of nowhere, was this revolution, was this uprising, was this strike, the like of which we have not seen before, and the like of which we haven't seen since. And that's why when you look back and you ask what was the most important thing in your life or the most dramatic thing, inevitably my thinking turns to the 1934 strike and what happened then and in the days since that time, and with the hope that before I go, they'll be organized. Amen, as we say. If I had some of my textile workers sitting here now, they would say amen. And that would be the size of it. Have we covered it?
I think so. Did we just hear all of that at the end? All of that talking in the background?
You could hear it, but it's...
Yeah. This was not the first time Southern workers had ever tried to organize.
No.
This was the first time that they organized at this massive level. So could you make that leap for us? Can you say, now listen, all this organizing, it wasn't the first time, they'd done it before. If you could talk about some of those earlier attempts and the difference, that would be really helpful.
Well, when you talk about the 1934 strike, or the uprising as I can call it, or revolution as I continue to call it, that was different than earlier efforts to organize in the textile industry in many ways.
Okay, I'm going to have to catch it. Can you say this strike in 34, this period of time, this, this organizing post-NRA, this was different than the organizing that happened before. The reason I'm asking you to do this is this won't go in the reflective part of the film.
Yeah.
This will go a little earlier, because we don't want people to think that this was the only time they ever did it.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
This 1934 uprising of effort to organize the textile workers wasn't the first time that there had been these efforts. There had been many efforts before in other parts of the country. Started way back in the turn of the century, as a matter of fact. In the South also, there had been efforts before that, but those were isolated.
All right. Now, what I want you to do is, we're just talking about the South now. So this was not the first time. Okay. This was not the first time in the South we ever organized like this before, and then just go to the earlier efforts.
Okay.
Great.
All right, we'll start it over.
Okay.
This wasn't the first time that efforts were made to organize the textile workers in the South. There were other efforts, but this one was different. What made it different was this was on a tremendous scale all over the South. It covered the South. The other ones had been in particular mills, particular places. For example, Elizabethton, Tennessee, in the early 20s, they had strikes up there, the like of which nobody would believe, and they organized. Gastonia had strikes. North Carolina and a number of places they had strikes primarily. All of these were one mills, two mills, one town, things of that kind. This wasn't that. This was all over the South. Wherever the mill was, almost without exception. I don't know what the statistics will show, but I know that based upon what was happening at the time and the calls that we had and the people we were trying to recruit and the organizers we were trying to find and the calls for help that we got everywhere, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, what little there was, Arkansas, the 1-2 little mills that they had over there, Louisiana and backwoods that we didn't even know there were mills there. We had calls for it. That's what made it different. And it was different. Thousands of people. No other textile strike prior to that time ever got anything like newspaper coverage, nor did it spread over the number of people. And it didn't make any difference, by the way. At that time, there were some mills that made thread and some mills that made cloth and some mills that made gray goods and all kinds of things. All of them were involved. It didn't make any difference what the product was, including the beginning of the rayon industry. They were involved in it too. And some of them came that had tried to come out before, joined in with it. Even some of them that had organized in the rayon industry joined in with it too to show their support. And they used to send people to help organize. That was the difference in it. And that's what made it so much more memorable in the terms of history of people trying to improve their lives, because it was widespread.
The big difference was that Roosevelt was behind them. I mean, that's the difference in the isolation, isn't it?
Well, no, they were. What I think created the difference was a number of things. It wasn't just political. At that time, there were shifts in machinery. There were changes in operations. We got the beginnings of what I call the time and motion study people were coming in at that time. The people that were running the mill weren't as content with the profits that they were making on it, so what they did was that they were buying new machinery and adding workloads on and making changes in the plant which disturbed the routine of the plant. And here are people who had been working for 1, 2, 5, 10, whatever number of years. They kept changing. In addition to that, there was the talk about changes in the laws, recognizing unions, giving people a voice in the plant, making changes in the community. And we had, as you know, we were in the middle of a depression where people were being laid off, where people were no longer having jobs. You know, a lot of them forget that before the strike took place, a good number of people in the textile industry had been laid off. And they were still in the village. And they still had no work, and they still had no money. And they found out that this pat on the back from the company didn't pay for groceries. And they ran out of credit at the company store. All of these combined together. This was part of the scene. That's why when we talk about it, we can't say there was one particular thing that did it. It was a combination of things. And there was talk that this was a new day dawning. This was a new era where you could live better and improve better, and where people could make a better living for themselves. And that was part of the talk that was going on at that time. Wasn't in the textile industry, because that was at the bottom of the bottom in terms of pay and in terms of work conditions. In some of the other places in the other ends of the country, people were beginning to get better wages out of it. If you remember, we were just in the automobile industry. What was it? I don't know if Ford's $5 a day had come in then or not, but that was big deal talked about. There were other types of industry that they were making more money in. In the steel fabricating industries, they were beginning to make a better living. There was a feeling of change. That was part of the change. They wanted to be part of the change. And that's why they did what they did. That's the reason they came out so fast. I can remember when we were telling them take it easy, take it easy, take it easy. We'll find the answers to it. And they weren't taking it easy because they weren't content. There was a lot of discontent. And those are things that I think in this country has motivated a lot of our changes that we have. Things build up. But this was the difference between that organizing drive as compared to the isolated ones in different places.
Great. Okay. Now, you didn't feel, right?
Of the textile?
Yeah.
No. No.
Do you remember when the message came from that convention that, okay, we're going to tell everyone to go on strike?
Of course.
Could you just tell me about that?
All right. That was a convention of the United Textile Workers in August. And one of the primary subjects was we want to strike. And this was primarily coming out of the South. I did not go to the convention. I probably could have if I'd had the money, but I'm sure I didn't have it at that time. As I watched the papers, it was apparent that the people who came primarily out of the South, and this is another significant thing too, were not taking the advice of the leadership of Gorman at the time, who was saying, take it easy, we'll work this thing out. When we're ready to strike, if we have to strike, we'll strike. We may not have to. He was trying to keep the lid on the boiling pot, and the lid was difficult to keep, and it was being resisted. And then the next I knew, and I was as surprised, I think there's a lot of other people down here, was when the approval was given that if you want to strike, we're ready to go. But even then, if I remember correctly on the approval, it was to be on the basis that if you wanted to strike, what you would have to do would be to request the permission to strike from the International Union, and then they would try to arrange to have people come down and work with you or see that it would be done. They didn't wait. When the convention was over, they were ready, and they came out. In many places, against the where they had established locals, and there were a few of them, against the advice of their leadership there, because they felt that now's the time, and that same movement of change that I was talking about was in the air.
Was it exciting? Was it exciting?
Was it exciting? Of course it was. When that many people come out, and I never have gotten over my amazement as to how many people responded. We had no idea, none whatsoever, that anything like that number would respond. And it wasn't all on the first day. It started, and as it like a snowball, kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. After a while, I forget now whether we were into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th day of it. We looked around, we said, well, are there any mills open? That much had transpired. And we were getting reports from everywhere. And you know, I've seen organizing drives where we've had people go in and where folks have been unhappy with their situation, and the organizers will talk to them. Yeah, I'm ready to sign a card. I'm ready to join the union, and you succeed in signing person after person after person. I've never seen anything like this. You didn't have to wait for them to go to their house and talk to them. They came to you. They looked for you. They looked for the union. They were looking for somebody, and where there were no unions, there were telegram after telegram after telegram. There were committees that came to Atlanta, to the headquarters of the AFL, and said, where's the organizer? We want to sign up. Want to get a charter. In those days, they talked more about, well, we've got to have a charter to show that we're an established union. And it was far beyond anybody's, not only dreams, but expectation. And that's what overwhelmed everybody at the beginning, because there were so many involved. There's no way you could handle it. I don't want to draw in the similarities, but it's if you don't prepare, there's no way you can assemble the forces. There's no way you can get it. Even with help that we got from other unions. I can remember we had other unions who were not industrial unions, who were trade unionists, and they some of their people helped us too. As a matter of fact, some of their people became, the husbands would belong to like a building trades union, and the wives would work in the mills. They were among the ones who became leaders. The wives would ask the husbands how they do in their unions, and that's what made it different than anything else.
How would the South be different today if it had worked?
Give me that again.
How would the South be different today if they had succeeded at the time?
If they what?
If they had succeeded. If the mill owners...
Oh, if they had succeeded? Well, you know, when we saw the industry, as I know it, begin to look for what I call cheap foreign labor, more than one time I said to myself that if we had succeeded in those days, that industry would still be in this country. We would still be making textiles of all kinds, garments of all kinds, and the thousands of people who have been displaced from those mills would still have jobs, and good-paying jobs, and not be working in these service industries at minimum wage, because their contracts would have seen to it that they would not be junked. And we didn't have, and I'm trying to remember the term of it now because they're using it in Europe now, in the European community, and it's called human dumping. And we would not have the human dumping that we have in that industry that has taken place in this country. Not only in that industry, but in other industries that are not organized.
I think I'm going to ask you one more thing, and then that's it, I promise. One of the biggest, the saddest things that I guess occurred was that these communities of dissent, these communities of citizens, real citizens, were totally dispersed.
Yeah.
And that must have had a devastating effect for you to watch that.
Well, when you talk about among the things that happened after the strike, where just any number of these people were blacklisted and they went from one town to another to another to another to try to get jobs, or where they decided, well, we're no longer going to stay in the mill village and work under the conditions we did. Well, it meant a big movement of people who at one time had been living for years in that same county or community. And while we saw it, and while in some places I think we may have regretted that that's what happened, and while it did have an effect because it meant then that the voices that had been trying to improve their conditions and who did not agree to go along and accept anything that was handed to them or that was told to them, we still saw that, at least I did, as the basis that here are some people who have at least the spirit and the desire to belong to a union and to improve their lot. And among them were people who, when the CIO came along in the 50s and in the early 50s, were among some of the leaders. They were among some of those who became the leaders in the wave of organization that took place after the World War II. And that, of course, was compounded also by the fact that during that war, why the women had gotten jobs, and there was a new day dawning for women workers in plants when they came out of the army, why the people came out of the army, where the people who were black were put on jobs that they never had been permitted to work on. Because when we talk about the textile industry today, we're not talking about a one-race industry. We're talking about a two-race industry. We're not talking about a one-gender industry. We're talking about a two-gender industry. In 34, it wasn't. In 34, it wasn't, because the ownership of it saw to it that the people who worked were white, and they were primarily men. There were some jobs that were known as women's jobs that are no longer just known as women's jobs. Been a lot of changes there. But the thing about it is that while we lost a lot of the people who were the dissenters in the little town, those seeds spread to other areas. And that became the basis of some of the CIO organizing, AFL organizing, the big push that took place in the 40s and 50s in the organization of trade unions over the country. And it had to have some effect back home too, because not all the dissenters moved out. Some of them did what they could until they had a chance again.
Great. We're done.
What else?
We're just going to be quiet for 30 seconds.
I'm rolling.
Room tone.
And room tone.
This is one that goes 365 days a year. Well, let's see, I think this is it. No. This keeps me sane too. No, that's up to you people what you want to do. Now you see, I still don't know exactly whether she wants me to talk about what these are or what they aren't.
You could just look at some stuff without talking for a while.
Okay.
Just do what you do when you're in here by yourself.
Well, when I'm in here by myself, I do like this. That's pretty.
Why do you do this, Joe? Joe, why do you keep your orchids ready
Well, that keeps me sane. When I come down here, I can forget all the problems of the world. And then there's so many different kinds too. It's like human beings, each one different shape and grows a different way and likes a different thing. And they come from all over the world too. And there's some of them that will bloom one day, and there's some of them that will stay bloom for weeks. Like that one that's hanging down there. That's one of the most unusual species that there is. And that's the first time I've ever bloomed it. And it'll stay bloomed like that for probably 3 or 4 weeks. And here's one right here. It blooms today, and tomorrow it's gone. It's all over. And then you see there's some of them like human beings too. These are not doing too well, so instead of putting them in incubators, we put them in our incubators so that we can see what they're going to do. Of course, when people talk about orchids, they usually think about this type of orchid over here, which is the one that's more commonly seen and known because they wear corsages, so they see more of them. And just take a look at the color on that. And then take a look at this one here. These grow in Hawaii more than anywhere else. Look how bright and brilliant that is. It's fantastic color.
Joe, could you draw a metaphor between these little orchids, even the tiny, tiny little ones that sprout, and people, or even the uprising of 34 and Southern textile workers?
Well, these orchids, I guess in a way, are like some of the human beings. They want to express themselves and they want to live a healthy sort of life. And some of them do it quite easily, and some of them don't. And the amazing thing about it is, though, that if you can get a group of the same kind together and get them to growing, you'll find that they seem to thrive by being together or close with others. And when it's one that's isolated or one that is a different kind than the other, it may not like that climate at all. It may disappear. That's the way, like a lot of people, when they get into unions, they get together and they work with people that they're compatible with and they have the same objectives and the same ideas. And that way, why they're able to grow and able to get somewhere too. And the thing, though, that amazes me about it is that there's so many different kinds. There's 40,000. And I've got a lot of different kinds here. And still, they can all be compatible one with the other, just like in a trade union. They can have all kinds of different personalities and still do well. Of course, there's when you don't take care of them, they can't strike, but they sure can wither and die away too. And that's what makes orchids interesting too. Let's just go back over on the other side. I want to see if there aren't some over there that I can take a look at. And see, the amazing thing about it is, like, take a look. See here? This grows, and this is where the flowers are on. They've already fallen off. Just like this one here will have a long extension on it. You see it? And it'll go up there, and it'll be 15, 21 of them, and they'll be white with long white tail dragging behind it. And it takes a certain kind of bee to pollinate it. This is like those other purple ones over there, only this is a different family. Here's one here, which is still a different family, different configuration, but they all make up part of orchids. Here's another one with another cross. Still more parts of orchids.
Go through just a little bit at a time. Don't say much. And if you get to a certain flower that speaks to you about
Yeah.
you
Okay.
can make a little story or a little metaphor.
This is one of the things that intrigues me. Here's one that grows erect, long with a lot of flowers. This is the way it grows in the wild. Here's one that's been hybridized. Look what we've done to it. Instead of it being just straight purple, it's purple with a certain amount of white and yellow in it. And although this is not the best time of the year for this kind of a plant, here's a kinsman of it. Just take a look at the color. Isn't that fantastic? And there's some of the other color too.
Just while you're holding it, 1 sec.
Yeah. That's what makes growing orchids interesting. And you can talk to them and they'll respond too. They'll tell you whether they're happy or not. Of course, I don't have my radio going here. I usually, when I'm down here, turn on the station that has classical music so that I know that they will enjoy it like I do. There's what they call a double one. See, here's one leaf and there's a second leaf. And here it is without the double leaf, and look at the color. All of these are anthuriums. This is one without the color. Look at this one. All kinds of colors. Some of them are straight white. These will last a long time. They grow primarily in Hawaii. They like air and they like light. See the second leaf? And then, of course, here is the snout. And then while we look at it, here's one that comes from down in Selby Gardens, which is world-renowned for, and these are anthuriums. And it's an amazing, this is its so-called bloom.